Howdy. Thanks for listening to Let the Movie Speak. Before we get started, we'd like to ask a favor of you.
It's a simple favor. If you could just rate and review our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you listen, that might help other ears get into our ecosystem here and hear another episode. Anyway, enjoy the show.
Choose your partners for the Virginia Reel.
We've sort of shocked the Confederacy, Scarlett.
It's a little bit like blockade running, isn't it?
It's worse. But I expect a very fancy profit out of it.
Well, I don't care what you expect or what they think. I'm going to dance and dance. Tonight I wouldn't mind dancing with Abe Lincoln himself.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a whoop. Can you imagine the difference one word would have meant? Not just for the film, which, adjusted for inflation, is still the highest grossing movie of all time, but for cinematic history. And speaking of history, what do we do with the unpleasantness of old, outdated, or evil ideals? Gone with the Wind may be a classic, but it's not immune from criticism. Nor should it be. But does a movie like this, an incredible undertaking of spectacle, size, and yes, humanity, deserve the dumpster?
Let the movie speak.
Welcome, everybody, to our 10th and final episode of our first series. This is Let the Movie Speak. My name is Travis.
I'm Justin.
And we are happy to be at the finish line, but also happy to be looking towards the future. Right, Justin?
Yeah, absolutely. So what is our future, Travis? Do we actually have a future, or are we just kind of misguided?
Is this getting confused? Existential? I think we can, at this point, let's reward the folks who have made it to episode 10, or the bandwagoner losers who have jumped in at episode 10 because they're massive Gone with the Wind fans or something.
Those fools.
Yeah. Would you like to do a quick reveal of our next series? It's going to be an abbreviated series, not a 10-episode series, sort of a palate cleanser, as we have kindly named it. And I'll do a little drum roll for you, and you can tell the folks what it is. Brrr.
Okay, Mr. Impresario, it's heist movies.
That's right.
Yes, that's right, friends. We're going to be looking at... oh my gosh, now I forgot the actual total, Travis. Is it six? Six heist movies, I think?
I think we landed on 6. Yeah, I mean, we might work a couple out in the end here before we get started, but it's going to be a small handful of heist movies, an eclectic mix, to say the least. And because we've been in a decade series, going through these first speaking films in the 1930s, and we've poked some fun at ourselves in this instance, right? Because we know that your average podcast listener or person in our demographic, whatever that may be, might not be looking for 10 movies from the 30s. Some of them I never heard before. That's what I want to listen to. So we decided to bring it down to earth a little bit more with this series, Justin.
Yeah, I mean, and so we're not just sticking in one decade. I think we start, the earliest movie here for heists is 1949's Crisscross. I think I got that right.
Yes.
And then we're going all the way up to 2017. Hey, that's recent.
It's the future. Yes.
And Baby Driver.
Yes. And some and a bunch in between there.
We are, exactly. So we are excited and looking forward to getting that going. I don't think we're taking much of a break, so if you're listening to this, it shouldn't be very long at all before those episodes are available for listening.
Yes, I'm excited to jump around decades after we've just been solidly in the 30s and have enjoyed it, I think, immensely for the most part, but it'll be fun to bounce around and just see what the other decades have to offer, all tangentially related to some kind of heist plotline. I mean, there's straight up heist movies in there, and I think we even got a Pink Panther movie in there because we both kind of love
that's right.
Peter Sellers as Clouseau. And if you haven't yet, if you are a loyal listener or again, a hop on the bandwagon person, if you could do us a solid, we would greatly appreciate it. If you would just and subscribe, obviously, that way you know when a new episode hits, you've got it right there in your pocket or wherever your phone lives. And also, leave a rating and review.
Right next to your watch fob.
Next to your watch fob, where my phone lives forever. Yeah, a rating and review is super important. So we get more ratings and reviews, and more people might hear the show, and we work really hard, and we're proud of it, and we'd love to see that happen. But enough of that. We are going to get into today's episode, which is Gone with the Wind. But before we do that, what did we watch this week? All right, old Justo, what did you watch this week other than Gone with the Wind?
No, that was it, Travis. I don't know if you're aware, Gone with the Wind is freaking... it took me 17 years to watch this movie, Travis. And I did it all within a week, which I'm told is not possible.
Right.
But I've done it. And, I mean, my gosh, I had to break it up, man. I could not do all 4 hours of this for multiple reasons in one night. So I am prepared to talk about that ad nauseum, but that's all I got, my friend. So I'm going to throw that tennis ball back to you and ask you the same question. What did you watch this week?
I'll tell you what I watched this week, but also, yes, I'm 57 years old now because I've watched Gone with the Wind. But other than Gone with the Wind, I think it was before I even started watching Gone with the Wind, and I did break it up into two. It has an intermission, so it's fine. The thing that I caught early on in the week, which was way shorter than Gone with the Wind, the continuing saga of a show that we've talked about a couple times on here and have really liked up to this point, WandaVision on Disney+. So what is this, episode 4? Ugh. Episode 4? Is that the latest one? I think so.
Yeah, it's episode 4.
Yeah, episode 4, the garbage, in my opinion. It's...
My gosh. Travis, it just goes back to... we've gone from innovative, creative, unusual storytelling, not just for Marvel, but just in general, and it's been really refreshing, really fun. And this fourth episode, I don't know what your take is, but it okay, so the end of the third episode, when this character is like thrown out of whatever make-believe world Wanda and Vision are in, and then we see all these like helicopters and the typical kind of Marvel like the government is approaching kind of scene, and that's fine. There's like 20 seconds of it, and it's like, okay, I get it now. All these people are watching what goes on inside. Don't really, interesting. Okay, for those 20 seconds. I'm ready to get back to WandaVision inside now, in the next decade or whatever. And instead of doing that, they just spend freaking 30 minutes doing essentially a big budget. And oh my gosh, it's produced just like a Marvel movie. Yeah. Just exposition of everything we kind of already know or didn't need to know at all, and nobody cares. Yeah. I mean, it's just such a missed... like, we talked about wasted episodes with The Mandalorian. This, to me, is a complete waste.
Yeah, it's an episode full of deleted scenes or something. Like, if they wanted to cut the show together differently and show you what was happening at the same time, that would be a way worse show. But also, this is an episode for, like... this is the showrunners, the producers, whoever decided, okay, look, we've gotten 3 episodes in, it's weird, and we're not giving them a lot of information. We're leading people in a pretty clear direction in my mind, but we're not spoon-feeding them and saying, oh, wait, don't forget, the audience is full of morons. So here's episode 4 to come along and... explain away like details that I never wanted an explanation for, and the explanation is so unsatisfying for many of these details, right? Like the scene where they're like transmitting on Ghostbusters machinery into the radio, and they're literally cutting back to what we've already seen. Like I'm like, we understand. Like, first of all, your audience is not that dumb. Let them figure it out by the time you get to the season. This is episode 4. If like at the end you feel like you might need to fill in some blanks to make some things make sense and make that part of your audience happy, fine. But this is like, potentially midway through the season of, if it's a normal length season of a television show, and they've shown the entire hand.
Right. No, I totally agree. And not just shown the hand, but just taken... You talked about treating the audience like morons. I think that is really encapsulated in when 2 characters are together watching on the Ghostbusters R Us, whatever kind of equipment they have. And and one says to the other, "Oh, are they in the 60s now?" And I don't know why they sound like Conan O'Brien when he's doing a voice, but I mean that's
we love you, Conan.
It's like no, my gosh, we don't need to just stop. I actually told the television several times. I said stop.
Yes.
And I thought I was Wanda, and I tried to change reality. And my wife said, "Take your medication and go back to bed." And so unfortunately, I wasn't able to do that. But yeah, man, what a bummer. So I really do hope that the next episode is a return to form. I hope this is just a blip, a very unpleasant blip. But at this point, I'm not holding my breath, unfortunately.
No, it feels like you're watching a boxing match, right? And WandaVision is a boxer, and all the conventions of not just Marvel, but like you said, like storytelling and TV, they're the other boxer, and they just landed a complete right hook. I do not, honestly, I loved the first 3 episodes of this. I don't think this show can recover from how, like, annoyingly simplistic and stupid that episode was. Like, how do you come back from that? What are you going to they introduced side characters that they clearly want to make a thing, the FBI
right.
Is he FBI detective? No, he's from some made up agency, right?
Yeah.
What's that guy?
No, oh man, what is his name? Jimmy something, right?
Yeah, I've seen him on. He's on Veep. And
I think he's actually in Ant-Man. He's a small character in one of the Ant-Man movies.
Yeah, he's some kind of a pull him in from the movies and get people to go, oh, it's that guy. And the hacker, but she's like a techie, whatever she is. Like, I found her to be
she's just a magician
and obnoxious, like just as the way she played the part. Like, she's very grating, but they're clearly going to carry that stuff forward. And man, I'll watch it because the first 2 episodes were so good. But I think that was it. I think we got 3 amazing episodes of WandaVision, and the rest will just be, one helicarrier short of a helicarrier, perhaps, or something like that.
I hope you're wrong, but I think you're right.
Oh, great. Well, okay. We'll see what happens. So from a multifaceted, interesting reality to a different reality in the pre-Civil War South, let's get into the Whopper, the one and only Gone with the Wind. All right, so let's get into it, Justin. What the intro to the film section for Gone with the Wind. Just be ready, listeners. This one might go long, Justin. I have a feeling.
Yeah, it's a ginormous story, not just in terms of runtime, but in scope, in where these characters go in their journey. And there's also as a movie that's quote unquote one of the greatest of all time. It deserves some special consideration and discussion, I think, especially in light of criticism that's not new to the movie. I think this movie has always had a smaller voice of criticism against it from different sections of our culture, but those voices have become louder and more people are listening in more recent history. So I think not that we usually run out of things to talk about, but I think this will be more an episode of just cutting out things because we don't have time to talk about them.
Right. Yeah. And we always, I think if we compiled a list of the things we meant to talk about and didn't get around to, it would be a mile long. And there's no shortage of them in this film. If you're just talking about, certain sequences or even whole storylines, I can't imagine. But what is your experience with Gone with the Wind, Justin? Is this the first time you've watched it?
Yeah, this is the first time I've watched it. I can remember as a younger person seeing, a couple scenes or something, probably when it was rerun on TV. And I, wanted to see this movie because, again, I didn't really, even though it's considered a classic or whatever, and I sort of knew the basics of the story, I never got around to it. And now that I've gotten around to it, I have mixed feelings. Yeah. What was your take?
This is my first go around with the movie, and I think if you're a movie nerd at any level, like you've seen some sequences or some shots, or you've seen the ubiquitous clip of Clark Gable saying, "Frankly, dear, I don't give a damn," like that. That's kind of everywhere, Oscar reel territory. But yeah, this is my first time certainly sitting down and watching it from beginning to end. And for everybody at home listening, this was a movie that had three directors. Three directors worked on this film. Credited director Victor Fleming was the last of the bunch. I believe one of them was kind of ousted on Clark Gable's wishes because he hated what he was doing. And Clark Gable, he was that guy, right? He could get rid of the director if he wanted to because he was sort of the moneymaker. But certainly Vivian Lee, as the other lead, brought some star power and name recognition. And just overall, all of the character actors and supporting actors, it really is an ensemble cast with those two squarely at the center. Pretty well known. And this movie, as we mentioned in the intro, was incredibly profitable, still adjusted for inflation, the most profitable movie ever made. Big Oscar sweep, eight out of the 13 Oscars that it was nominated for. And now is probably the time where we should get the intro part of this in that is perhaps more interesting than any of those nuts and bolts things. The real controversy surrounding Gone with the Wind, I think, and Justin, jump in whenever you feel like you need to, is that it, I guess the criticism in general will be that it depicts the South pre-Civil War in a way that is purely romanticized and nostalgia-driven and whitewashed in a way, right? And I will say, while we're talking about our experience with the film, I think we watched this in two different streaming services or different ways. So you go first. You watched this in sort of like a fully unadulterated format, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Right. I watched this from a streaming source. I think it was archive.org. And so it was just an upload by somebody. And so it's just the entirety of the movie, including all those, the intermission, et cetera, that I mentioned. And there's no prelude, no sort of, how Disney Plus gives a warning now for all of their films and content that's older before you watch it. There's none of that here. So I just saw it as it was originally shown, but I think you watched it on HBO Max. Is that right?
Yeah, I did, because that's a streaming service that I have already and use. And that's an interesting one because the recent controversy that popped up a little over a year ago, I think at this time, surrounded HBO Max because they had the film, the public outcry became loud enough where HBO decided, okay, we need to do something about this. So they pulled the film from their streaming service and promised that they weren't going to, re-add it to the list of available films until they put a preface on the front of the film. And that's exactly what they did. I don't know how long that took, but the version I saw opens with a professor of African American studies giving up. This is how I would classify it. You go watch it on HBO Max if you want to, form your own opinion here. But basically, she just contextualizes the release of the film and the production of the film for us today. And there's some really important details in there that I valued, and I didn't feel like biased. Put a particular bias on my intake of the story of the movie. Most notably, this movie was, protested upon the announcement of production. Like, black audiences, there was an outcry from that community, certainly, that this was going to be made into a major motion picture to begin with. She has a quote at the beginning there that says, "The film depicts a nostalgic, horror-defying view of slavery and perpetuates stereotypes of inept and loyal black characters." That's a little bit more story-based as far as a comment goes, but I think it's certainly pretty objectively true that it does depict a nostalgic, horror-defying view of slavery in particular. The things that I found most helpful were just contextualizing the release of the film. Black cast members weren't allowed to attend the premiere because Georgia had Jim Crow laws and they were segregated. So that's kind of nuts and despicable to know and to think about now. Heidi McDaniel, who famously won the first Oscar of any African-American actress. A couple things, she was not allowed to sit with her white co-stars until she went to pick up her Oscar. And then when she did, she read a speech that was written for her by the producers of the film. So, certainly some details in there, Justin, that I think people need to know. And I don't believe that this preface did anything to damage my experience or like my work that I needed to put in. But it did offer some really important historical context. So that to me was the perfect call by HBO Max, because they offered that historical contextual information, and then they specifically made a point and said, now you're going to watch the unedited, as released version of Gone with the Wind, an incredible landmark film, which is not a mutually exclusive thing to say. From it depicts a nostalgic horror-defying view of slavery, right? So what's your take on the preface?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's the right thing to do, and I understand maybe some people do think, no, the right thing to do is just throw this movie in the trash. But I don't think we would, especially because this does warrant discussion of those themes that professor discussed in the intro of that film. I think we have to kind of look these things in the face and see where have we come from, and what is, because what the movie is saying, right? What our podcast is about is going to indicate to us what larger cultural trends, what Americans thought, or in this case maybe more what did white America think about this kind of story and its realism or lack thereof. So it's unfortunate that I'm sure there's some people that are very upset that, and hopefully they're a minority, but are upset that HBO would even have somebody, give a preface. But I think HBO has hired this person who's an expert in her field, right? To give a thoughtful and an informed and a somewhat authoritative opinion and an argument about, hey, some of those things are not arguments, right? Like Hattie McDaniel had to sit away from her white co-stars. Not an argument, just a fact of history. All black people are shown as servile and happy. More of an argument, that we'll get into hopefully as we talk about this movie. But it's absolutely, I think it would be unfortunate to say, gosh, why would HBO ever do that? Because with the kind of trauma that America has gone through in the last couple of years as it relates to race relationships, especially, this is kind of the bare minimum that they could do. And get away with it. In other words, like they have to do. You can't, in the time that we live in, you can't just ignore it. That's not going to be, which we see unfortunately other people in other sectors of our culture trying to do. And I'm sorry, I'm not trying to get too political, but it seems a little inevitable with the kind of subject matter that we're talking about. So I think it's a good call, and it does invite viewers who are probably, don't you think, Travis? Most people, they go to watch a movie and they don't hop on Wikipedia or IMDb after and go like, all right, let's find out what was going on in 1977. Mm-hmm. They just want to enjoy the movie, and then that might be as much as they do. So I'm hopeful that, that kind of preface for people that at least watched it on HBO, it does get them thinking a little bit, if not convincing them. I don't think that's trying to get them to appreciate the movie in a different way, and it's not trying to say this is because I didn't watch the preface with you, but I don't think her argument was like, this is a horrible movie. This movie is just the worst. It's a shame that it exists at all. Watch it if you're going to, I guess. No, she's more trying to give you a much more thoughtful, like, this is what's going on. This is why there's been some controversy about it. Now watch the movie. And so I think that's a respectful, and hopefully it allows for some viewers to be a little more informed as they go in, so that they know why some people are clamoring for this to be, quote unquote canceled or what have you. So yeah, I think it's a valid, and it shouldn't be, I don't think, an offensive step. If you're, I would just challenge, if you feel like maybe you're one of those people like, gosh, that's just way too far, how dare HBO tell me how to think? No. I don't think HBO is telling you how to think, nor is that professor. They're just trying, these are legitimate contextual issues that exist with the text or with the movie. And so I think to be aware of them is just going to make your experience of that movie that much richer, frankly. Yeah. And hopefully get you to appreciate different things.
Yeah. To me, it perfectly set the stage to begin watching the movie. Now, if I had to look back, this is our 10th film of this decade, and I don't think there's a single one on the list that I can look at and not find some couple minute portion of our podcast or more where we haven't had to go, wow, that's 1930s for you, for whatever reason, whether it's men and women, whether it's, race, or, just any number of things that are thankfully in the past, right? I mean, in a lot of ways, certainly not in every way. And, we need to strive for a greater definition of justice, but the stuff that this movie requires you to do, like contextually, is first of all, just it's longer and it's dealing with the idea of the Civil War breaking out and what happened after it. It is much heavier lifting to do in that department. So that feels like the right step for me. And I think it set the stage very well for me to enjoy the parts of this movie that I believe are unquestionably of merit. The quote that she had in there that really stuck with me from beginning to the end was, "This can be an incredible film to experience, and this can be an incredibly painful film to experience." And to be perfectly honest, as a white dude, I needed to hear that. And at the same time, there is credit to be given to the author of the novel and the makers of the film as far as most people's perception and take from this movie. It may differ from the authorial intent or the filmmaking intent, right? And we're going to get into that as far as how people take it on the whole. But let's get into the meat and potatoes, into the what's it saying section. How's that sound?
Let's do it.
So here we address all the big stuff. How did it look? How did it sound? Do we like the story? Do we like the acting? All of that good stuff. And the first thing before we get to any characters, any plot, is color, right? We've watched 9 black and white movies, all pretty fun experiences. But man, when the screen opens up, we've been living with these movies now, Justin, for weeks and weeks and weeks and a few months now. For me to watch, it's not the only thing I've watched in color in that time period, but I'm getting ready to do my podcast prep, watching, note taking, all that, and it's like bam, and huge vista, and not just color, but like this is a beautifully photographed color film. Like there are way uglier movies that came out last year than something like this. So what was your response to that, having been stuck in the black and white ages for a while?
Yeah, again, like you, because that's not the only thing I have watched recently that was in color. It didn't, I guess I was in a slightly different frame of mind where I'm expecting color, but even so, this movie just slaps you awake or throws a bucket of, cold color water on you.
Yeah.
There is no denying that it is, part of the reason I think this movie is regarded as a classic is in no small part due to how beautifully it's shot. This isn't just done in color as like, and you would think with one of the first color movies that was wide released that, they're just kind of figuring it out. They're going to, no, I mean, for being as old as it is and one of the forerunners of that technology, I guess we'll call it, it's incredible. They knew exactly what they were doing. It's almost like painters. And so, it just makes the silhouettes pop that much more. And my goodness, it is just unlike we quoted Jimmy Stewart talking about colorizing not Gone with the Wind, but It's a Wonderful Life, and disdaining it as a bath of Easter egg paint or something like that.
Yeah.
This is not that. This is vibrant with the colors of life.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's like it would be forgivable, right, for like this or The Wizard of Oz, for that matter, which came out in the same year and was, as big of a film touchstone in many ways. It would be acceptable for either of those films to be like, wow, that's in color, but that's kind of where it ends. But, I'm not going to speak for The Wizard of Oz at the moment, but this is, even if this was shot in black and white, it would be so thoughtfully constructed, like visually. And the fact that it is in color, that, like you were saying, they make full use of it and take full advantage of that within the form that they're in. And so that jumped off the screen immediately to me. Another thing that jumped off the screen immediately to me, and I think gave me a little bit of the willies as far as what am I in for, is that opening narration crawl. Yeah. And I actually happen to have it in front of me here because this book does appear in Roger Ebert, The Great Movies. Good old Roger Ebert giving us some words of wisdom again from the great beyond. This is the opening crawl. There was a land of cavaliers and cotton fields called the Old South. Here in this pretty world, gallantry took its last bow. Here was the last ever to be seen of knights and their ladies fair, of master and slave. Look for it only in books, for it is no more than a dream remembered, a civilization gone with the wind.
And you know what they forgot to do, Travis, was put "thank goodness" at the end.
That's it. Yeah.
It just gave me, like you, it made me want to, I was really scared, frankly.
Yep.
When that came up on the screen and, look for it no more, I was like, oh my gosh, what the heck are we in for? You know, I was thinking that the very worst accusations that were being leveled at this movie must be unequivocally true. And I think it's some of the key words in there, right? Gallantry took its last bow.
Yeah.
What? Gallantry? Are you talking about, and of course, holistically, I'm not saying this to try to appease anybody, but I'm sure just because of the vast amount, unfortunately, of slavery that was in the U.S., probably not every slave was treated the same, good, bad, and indifferent, right? However, we know that maybe most, I don't know how we want to, I'm not going to tack a percentage on that because I'm not a historian, but there was some horrific atrocities where people are treated worse than animals or livestock that are going on. So to say, here's a time of gallantry, how tone deaf can you be?
Right.
It'd be like, oh, here come the Nazis. Well, there goes the last of color in 1945.
Right.
When the Third Reich took it. It's like, no, my goodness, no. So yeah, the gallantry is what really rubs me, I think, the rawest there, and that it says knights and their ladies fair. Okay, but then master and slave, like, why would we be bemoaning that? You know, it's kind of shocking, frankly, to read that.
Yeah, it is, and I agree. I had to take a Tums after I read it because I was like, there's 3 hours and 40 something minutes left, and is it just going to make me angry for that time, or is something going to evolve before my eyes? And I think you'll find, right, if you stop there, you should be angry. Like, you should be upset. You should have the reaction that I think a lot of folks have and perhaps latched onto. But it does tell a sweeping, grand story that, let's not bury the lead here. It's a tragic, horrific, sad story, right? And so the juxtaposition, which I'm not prepared to give credit that is an intentional juxtaposition. That's where I'm at. But there is a juxtaposition between what you read there and everything you see that follows.
Yes.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
It's a tragedy 100%. So I guess we'll get there when we get there.
Yeah. So who do we have here? Let's talk about we'll do sort of a light brush stroke over some casting and performances, and then as we get into story, we'll talk about the characters' kind of function and purpose. But we have Clark Gable's in this movie. Not sure if you knew that. He plays Rhett Butler. We have Vivian Lee as Scarlett O'Hara, and then beyond that, the people that occupy the screen in story time: Thomas Mitchell as Gerald O'Hara, her father. Barbara O'Neill as Ellen, his wife, which she's kind of a smaller part. And who? Oh, there's so many. Geez, obviously Hattie McDaniel as
Leslie Howard, right?
Yes, Leslie Howard as Ashley. And then there's a bunch of siblings and cousins and other folks who come in and out. There's sort of the slave characters who last the bulk of the film, and we'll talk about why that is. Hattie McDaniel is Mammy, Oscar Polk is Pork, and Butterfly McQueen is Prissy. Those are the three that we spend a good amount of time with. Arguably not enough time with, but we'll get there in due time. Who's the last one I want to mention is
it Olivia?
Yeah, and that kind of core group are the ones who quite literally survive, the tale. Not all of them, but like the bulk of the screen time and whatnot. I think I would classify the acting in this movie as anywhere from good to great, kind of all the time.
Yep.
Nobody isn't pulling their weight, and it's clearly of note. Heidi McDaniel won Best Supporting Actress as the first African American ever. That's an immense achievement, and there's no question she earns the crap out of her Oscar in this movie. It's an incredible performance. So story-wise, we've got the picturesque colonial plantation South, and some sort of relationship drama. Let's talk about the central character here, Scarlett O'Hara, played by Vivian Leigh. We did a Wuthering Heights episode a couple weeks ago. Justin, do you remember Wuthering Heights?
Unfortunately, I do. There might be some overlap. I think where you might be going with that is from scene 1, Scarlett O'Hara is portrayed as a completely self-absorbed, evil person.
Yeah, that's it.
And it's interesting. And of course, we bring up Wuthering Heights because several characters in there are the same. But it's interesting to me that if you watched this movie, Gone with the Wind, and you were like, boy, I want to be, wasn't Scarlett a wonderful character? I want to be like her or whatever. I would say you missed the point completely,
right?
Because that this character is so selfish, and so I mean the levels that she will stoop to get her own way involve sacrificing literally other people's lives, intentionally and unintentionally.
Yeah.
And so, to me, that suggests this person is that way because she's been brought up in the society, in this culture that has said, you are above other human beings who will serve you at your beck and call and will do everything for you. How the heck is that going to breed anyone of good and noble character?
Right.
And so, like you said, whether intentionally or not, to me, her character is the most... although other characters are too, but she's the most flagrant display of what the heck... Well, I mean, there's many things wrong with the Old South, right?
Yeah.
But her character is like, this is the product, and she's like the belle of the ball all the time, right? But holy crap, if she's the belle of the ball, if she's the best the South has to offer, then I'm glad the South took its last bow, and wish it took its last bow quite a bit earlier, frankly.
Right, of course. Yeah, and I mean, her whole character... really, from moment one through, you could at least argue the first half of the film, but really it doesn't ever really go away until maybe the last moment. And maybe not even then, right? The film ends ambiguously, as it sort of semi-ends in many places, is she finds her identity and certainly superiority over, black folks and slavery. That's plantation culture for you, the servitude factor and all that. But she finds her value in... like finding her love and getting married and living that picturesque plantation, Antebellum South sort of oil painting life. And for that reason, I just could not help but see her as some sort of, analog of Catherine in Wuthering Heights, right? Like the character is purely driven by, if I could just find this amorphous thing called love that I, define for myself, and get it the way I want it, no matter what the cost. I will be happy then, and that's just it's a sad thing to watch play out in many ways. So obviously, her first love and arguably only love is Ashley, who is about to be engaged to another, and we're gonna see her her understanding of marriage and her usage of marriage is really transactional, to say the least. Wouldn't you say, Justin?
Absolutely. I mean, the first person that she marries, she does so just to, as she later tells Ashley, just to make him jealous. Well, good job, lady. And unfortunately that marriage doesn't, well, fortunately, maybe, good, bad, or indifferent, that marriage is very short, as her first husband is quickly killed in the ensuing battle of the the Civil War. And I don't want to steer us away, Travis, from the point about marriage, because I think there's a lot to talk about there and how she treats that union.
Right.
But that does remind me her husband being killed so early in the movie. For a movie, again, that supposedly idealizes the South, it is, I think, of note that there's a very early scene when, oh my gosh, this scene we could talk about so much here, when all the men are downstairs talking about the war, and the impending war, and the women are upstairs taking a nap, and all these little, little girls that are African American, little slave girls, are fanning them with feathers.
Oh, yeah.
To me, that's not played for laughs,
No.
right? And hey, maybe that's just because I'm in the next century now. But it's like, it's tragic to watch, and it's like, man, these kids just look like I want to kill myself. I've been doing this for 3 hours, and so I think even in a small way, the movie shows like this is not a good thing,
Yeah.
And so it would be one thing if the kids were just like, oh boy, what do you need, Miss Scarlet, or whatever, but they're not. They just look like zombies.
Yeah.
So I think that's interesting that little note is in there. And then going back to the men downstairs, they're all talking about the war, and the consensus is the South is going to whip those Yankees into shape. We've got this in the bag. And the only two characters in the movie, Clark Gable's Rhett Butler and Leslie Howard's Ashley, they're the only two that say, probably not. And they say that for different reasons, right? Leslie or Ashley has this more kind of not pragmatic, but maybe a more emotional or more poetic kind of reality of war. Like, guys, war's not going to be a good thing. War just leads to. Well, it's one thing to think you're going to fight for your cause, and he admits, like, I'll go and I'll fight, but I'm not going to be happy about that. It's going to bring a lot of sorrow.
Yeah, he says, the line is, most of the miseries of the world were caused by war, and when they were over, no one knew what they were about, which is killer good. Like, it is saying in that one sentence, like, what the Grand Illusion said in its entire runtime, it certainly presents... and I think we'll keep hammering this point, right? Yes, the Confederate, folks in this are fighting for something bad, a culture that should not be upheld, and all of that. And you could view it and perhaps take it as the movie is glorifying their cause. But I think it kind of tells you over and over, right, through nuanced, layered ways, through Rhett and through Ashley and through the depiction of war and I think the masterful way in which it says over and over and over again, war is hell, war is terrible.
Yeah.
People are being blown to pieces, people are dying. Who cares about the cause if it causes this much destruction, right? That is a very complicated statement. It is not simple.
No, not at all. And Rhett gives a little bit of a simpler, more pragmatic kind of approach, which is still, I don't think it's made up. I think it bears a lot of truth and history. He says, "Look, guys, you may have all the fighting spirit you think you can muster, but the North has this thing called industry, and you don't. And so he who is able to make the most guns and arm the most people is going to win." And so it's his is not altruistic. He does not have anything, deeply meaningful like Ashley does, which you just read. But it's interesting to me that those two characters who are essentially the two male leads in this movie tell the audience the South is doomed and this war is not going to bring anything good.
Yeah. He I have to say now, before we get too far into Rhett Butler, it is impossible for me not to look at this character, Rhett Butler. He comes on the scene. Immediately, he's introduced as a man with a bad reputation, bad intentions, a sketchy history.
Yeah.
He specifically calls it out. He says, I believe in Rhett Butler, right? He's only in this for profit, he'll say in a scene just a little bit later. This is Han Solo. Like, I mean, come on. Like, in so many ways, he is the pirate of the movie. Like, he is out there for himself. He is going to look after his strategic interests and his, financial interests even. It's just funny to me, that parallel. Like, I don't know how you have Han Solo without Rhett Butler.
Right, and he has that Wookiee with him too, which is really, I don't think most people are aware of that.
Groundbreaking for the time, yeah. So, I mean, Clark Gable comes on the scene as Rhett Butler, immediately has what looks like eyes for Scarlett O'Hara, and that is going to be sort of the genesis of the rest of the drama of the story in many ways. Let's talk about the casualty list scene. So there's a lot that happens between the opening barbecue. This little thing happens called the Civil War starts. Men go to, all of them that we see basically enlist, and then her husband gets killed very quickly. It's like they're married, and then boom, you see a letter on screen. He's dead. She's not super sad about it. She's not really in mourning. She's even complaining about having to be in mourning. And then we find her at a dance sort of event, and she's not dancing, but she'd like to be dancing. And Rhett shows back up again, right? And so what do you have to say about Rhett Butler and Scarlett O'Hara, and maybe his intentions or something like that?
Yeah, as far as they're related, at least it seems appropriate to say game knows game, and so he pegs her for what she is from the get-go and lets her know in no uncertain terms. He doesn't try to woo her with fake affections or gifts or anything. He just says, you're just as selfish as me. You're only in this for you. So I'm not into marriage. I just want to be selfish with you. And, so he has no nobility.
Right.
Excuse me. He has no nobility with her. And so she's resistant to that because in her selfish view, not for any moral reasons, but in her selfish view, that's not what love is supposed to look like. Not that her image of love is really pure or good, but it's just not what she wants. So she rejects him. But the first kind of way in which you see that barrier start to be broke down is, like you said, when they're at this ball together and she's in her mourning clothes. And Rhett Butler flies the Millennium Falcon in. Again, another weird kind of, you should have seen that coming. Yeah, and he's like, all right, stay with... I don't think he was called Chewie. I think he was called Dewey. So, obviously, George took a little license there. But Rhett Butler comes to the ball, and she tries to kind of avoid him, but then they end up dancing together, and it's very scandalous, and I think done to good humorous use of, how offended... some people in that culture were, in her family or friends circle, like, how could she be dancing in her funeral clothes,
Right.
And then they have this very elaborate, I don't know about you, but, because I know very little about choreography or whatever, but as I was watching that dance that they were doing, which is quite a bit different from twerking, which I hear the kids are into now.
Yeah, that was Civil War twerking, yes.
Civil War twerking, yeah, and so... Just the again, not necessarily one of the most impressive sequences of the movie, but just another. It's kind of a bygone era where that amount of choreography was just a given. This is not a dancing movie, but it's kind of elaborate. What is pulled off, at least in my opinion. I'm not an expert, so maybe one of our experts can come on and tell me I'm very foolish and wrong. But
it's kind of wild though, like to see, we've seen Clark Gable in, like It Happened One Night, and obviously he was this massive star at this time, but he's not known as like Fred Astaire by any means, right? It's not like the artist with what's his name, Jean Dujardin, where he's like dancing is sort of a big part of his repertoire, but then he just like goes for it, and I'm like, this is even an old Clark Gable, and he just like jumps in there and looks like he's done it every day of his life. It is really like that is a like cultural thing that you see now, and you're like, wow, everyone can dance, almost like in It Happened One Night when we're like, wow, everyone could sing. It's a similar dynamic to that, and I think that we're gonna really like land on a few key scenes that affected us, and I'm gonna tee that off by saying the scene when they get the casualty list is one of those scenes in this movie, right? That says to me the most compelling theme is of any war movie should the taste left in your mouth, right? The thing you walk away with should be, we should always do everything possible as human beings to avoid this horrific thing we know called war, right? Yeah. And if the movie doesn't do that, it's irresponsible, bar none. Like, there's no question in my mind.
Right.
And this scene does that immediately, right? Like, you see this huge horde of people coming to just get a list and see if their loved one is on that list of casualties. And I got to tell you, I've been reading Charles Dickens' The Tale of Two Cities, And it reminds me of a very specific scene from that novel where, Dickens is talking about pre-Revolutionary War France. And it's the first time in the novel you get to see or read of Paris. And there's this sequence where he's just describing a guy who's taken this large cask of wine and he drops the barrel in the street and it cracks all over the sidewalk and spills into the little cobblestone, and makes little trails and little streams. And he just describes, right, like the poor, impoverished, dirty people that fill the streets coming to lap it up, right, with their mouths and with their hands, and to suck off the broken pieces of wood, that wine. And there's a line in that section where he says, and as much mud was taken up as wine in that moment, or something like that. And to me, I'm watching this scene where for this cultural context, this is that moment, right? Everybody's gathered around, they're waiting for that casualty list, and then as they grab it, you just see what has become of a society where things have gone awry for a very particular reason. And Rhett reveals his hand over and over and over again. Like you said, he's very pragmatic, right? He sees these people weeping and he doesn't really have a ton of compassion on them. He said, look at this miserable lot of people. And then he says, the South is singing to its knees. It'll never rise again. Like, we're not even done with the war yet. And he's looking around saying, like, this is a complete waste of time. And he's fighting, right? And he's not fighting for the South. He's fighting for himself. But man, that scene got me. I don't know about you.
No, it absolutely did. And for much the same ways, I found the most powerful thing in there of that scene personally to be when there's an older couple and he's in uniform, they're both gray-haired, and they get the notice that their son has been killed. And it totally, to me, it rightly humanizes the cost of war. I don't feel bad for those people because they're Southerners. It's really irrelevant. I feel bad because this is a mother and a father that have just lost their son, frankly, for no good reason.
Yeah.
And it's done so. It's beautiful because it's tragic. It's not beautiful because it's a good thing, but it's a beautiful reminder of what you said, that the cost of this, as the movie will say over and over again, like I'm sure we're going to talk about that wide shot when she walks through all of the injured, and it's to me that's not like, oh darn, the poor Southerners, it's like, oh my gosh, these poor people. Why the heck would we, again, whatever the audience thinks it's trying to say, what I think the movie's actually saying is that this is futile. Yeah. This war is yes, it's if half of the nation is saying, nope, we want slaves, we're leaving, you didn't leave a lot of room for ambiguity or options, for the other half of the nation. But at the same time, it's like, why was that really worth it? Yeah. Is it that important to you that you want your sons and your daughters and people just to die? Yeah. So that you can own other people? Again, it's one of those. If you kind of want to deconstruct it, I don't see that as like, oh boy, well that's just too bad that they had to suffer that way, the poor Southerners. No. It's more like this is the true cost of this war, and it could have been avoided.
Yeah, let's while we're on that subject, let's just go back to back with 3 of those scenes. Okay, that will be the first one, right? I think the casualty list scene for me is the first kind of really like pillar of, it holds up that theme in such a strong way that like on that merit alone, it's saying something valuable, right? And we're not even in the wrap up section yet, but to me that is super, super important. The second scene like that is the scene you alluded to, right? Like we see her come in contact with really the horrors of war on a massive scale, right? When she's watching the casualty list go up. But what's she doing in that scene? She's just wanting to see if the person she loves, who's married to this, person who's very close and dear to her, that she secretly loves this man, is as long as he's not on the list, she's kind of okay. She's not really all that affected by this, right? She's not that touched by it. But the next scene, I think, is a little different, right? Now, you can make the argument that Scarlett O'Hara doesn't have a massively bending arc in this film, but I do think she has moments where things wash over her and vicariously us, the audience, in that wide shot, okay? She's walking through the streets of Atlanta, after Gettysburg, if I'm not mistaken, and it pulls out and pulls out, and I don't know what the camera was on. I don't know what lens they were using. I don't know how many people were laying in that street, but it's just body after body after body, and just like maimed, wounded, just gray uniforms everywhere. And she's just this ant just walking through the center of it. That was jaw-dropping to me. Like, I have never seen something so effective in what it was trying to do as that wide shot.
Absolutely. And the scale of this movie at times is, I mean, it's second to none. I don't think a lot of things that have been done in this movie have really been equaled or tried, frankly, since then.
Right.
Just the amount of actors that you would have to have on screen for that shot is tremendous.
Yeah.
And to have them all not, goofing off or whatever. I mean, it's just it. So as a cinematic achievement, I think I would agree with you. It's not only affecting, but just it's jaw-dropping because of the amount of work that had to go just to set up that shot.
Yeah.
And so when that shot pulls all the way out and you see the tattered Confederate flag, again, I don't see that as like, darn it, wouldn't that be good if that flag was still flying? I see that more as like, I mean, not, I have a Yankee accent, right? So maybe this sounds a little heartless, but it's like, you stupid people that wanted this, whatever politicians you were, whoever you were that supported that flag, you've brought your own hell upon you.
Yeah.
And this is the consequence of holding allegiance to that flag.
Yeah, exactly.
So I don't see it as, because I've heard some other people, some very smart people try to argue that specific scene reinforces the lost cause mythology where, the South was fighting nobly and just unfortunately outmatched.
Right.
No, I see that as like, how can you look at those, hundreds or thousands of bodies out there and that flag and have anything but disdain for the powers that be that put those men and women there?
Yeah, and it's such an important movie that I think it's worth fighting over in this way, right? Because I can see it from both ways, right? Like, whether the authorial intent was what you described or not, as a reappraisal of historical film landmark thing, right? Like, we should be able to look at this now and say, maybe the DP for that shot thought, you know what, we're going to engender a specific Southern sympathy here. But we can look at it now, right? And we can reclaim the meaning of that shot if that was what it was initially. We can say, like, look at it. Look at the torn, tattered Confederate flag and look at the massive bodies in its wake. Cause and effect. It's A to B. You know what I mean? Like, so I agree that goes down in the history books for me as like, I literally, my mouth was open. I could not believe it that the camera just kept pulling back. And you just see her, right? And think about the symbolism here. She is like dead center in the shot. And as it pulls back, Scarlet becomes smaller. And the hell around her becomes bigger. And I think I'm applying an okay interpretation to this. Like, in that moment, at least for a time, in that horrible thing she was walking through, she didn't just see herself and her wants and her wishes and her love, identity, and all that. She saw what we saw, which is the scope and scale of this stuff. The third sequence of, again, driving point this home that, like, if you're, I think you said this before, but if you are about ready to, like, pick up a gun or a sword or an object, right, and go to war against another human being, prepared to end their life, you must understand, right, what the sacred life that you're about to destroy really means. And that is the, like, makeshift hospital scene in the church, in the chapel.
Oh boy.
Yeah, where she is playing nurse, albeit not very well, because this is, again, she's been chewed up and spit out by everything that's happening around her. And this is a more detailed, like, close up version of the same kind of thing, where we see the doctor going from person to person and just saying, like, the wounded and the injured are, I need something for the pain, doctor. I need something for, I'm sorry, we have nothing for you. We have nothing for you. There's a particular case of a man whose leg is injured, and that is the moment that I can hardly talk about it.
Yeah, it's leading up to that, Travis, where she's walking through with the doctor and he's tending to these people. It's a really, I think this movie does a great job of showing the pain of war without, Saving Private Ryan or Band of Brothers or whatever has its place. But I think, unfortunately, with those movies, now it's become expected, like, if you're going to truly show the horror of war, you're going to show the guts, and the young boys are going to be holding them and screaming for mama. And it's like, okay, yes, that's a real thing, and that's absolutely horrific. However, I think it also becomes a trap of gratuity.
Yeah.
And just horrific in like a slasher film kind of way, where it's not horrific because it's necessarily scary. It just becomes gross after a while, and
Sure.
you get desensitized to it, which is, I think, the opposite effect of what filmmakers are going for. So contrast that with this movie, where she's walking through, and you just see these guys that are laying in bed, and one guy has absolutely lost his mind and is, like literally playing with his lips, with his fingers. It's just, the cost of war is again fully on display, and albeit in a different way. And I think those shots of, she goes by some other men that are injured before she gets to the specific scene you mentioned, and it just in not extremely graphic, but in very calculated, telling ways, it says, wounds of war are different. It's not all, hey, my large intestine is hanging out.
Right.
It's mental, it's physical, it's emotional, and so then the doctor, there's kind of this, there's a little bit of lead up to this specific scene where the doctor goes to this guy and is like, he's got gangrene, and I think we're going to have to lose the leg. And my grandfather actually has a lot of he's very much into the old West and history of the Civil War, etc. So he had kind of a library of books about these things. And I remember as a kid reading one of these books about medical equipment and the kind of process of medicine in the Civil War and post-Civil War era until we really get to essentially 1900. And so often, unfortunately, these guys, they would be very quick to take the leg or the arm because they didn't know how to stop infections. And so whether or not that was right, I mean, frankly, the book that I read, I recall it saying, probably a lot more people lost appendages than needed to, simply because they knew how to, if they did that, they could stop it, and they didn't really know how else to treat it, and they didn't want to, lose life. So this doctor is going that route. Hey, this guy's got gangrene. I'm going to have to take the leg. And he doesn't have any kind of pain relief or anything to give him. So they go to this larger operating room, and the shot, it's perfect because it's like this vaulted ceiling kind of.
Yeah.
So there's just this infinite space for this guy's screams to go up. And as he realizes what the doctor is going to do, and as Scarlett approaches the room, he starts screaming bloody murder. Don't take my leg. Please stop. It's truly one of the most, to this day, it's so affecting because you don't even see the guy's face, Travis. You don't even see, it's shot above where you see the doctor standing over him, and you see Scarlett standing horrified in the doorway and unable to confront that any further. But his screams, I can still hear them, and it's just a movie. I know they're actors, but it is so affecting because it captures the truth of that kind of, again, that scream isn't just for, I really don't want to lose my leg right now. Mm-hmm. It's for, how did I get here? I just want to be back with my family, wherever they are. I don't want to be a part of this war. I don't want any more of this sin or whatever that's in the world that's causing this.
Yeah.
I just want to be done. And there's so much in those screams and in the way that's shot that, I mean, just like you, Travis, I think you'd kind of have to be inhuman to not be affected by that scene.
Yeah, and there's a final detail in that sequence that I did not miss, and I wrote it down. She, is supposed to go and help with the amputation, and she can't, right? She has to leave because of that moment that you described, and she walks very slowly, traumatized herself, right, as one would be, out of that room. And as she actually exits the archway for that chapel, there's an inscription above the door that says, "Peace be within thy walls." And I just thought, okay, set designer A+. Like, you nailed it. You know what I mean? Like, this is about so much more than a church supposed to being being a peaceful place. It's what have we done to each other? And there's you could write several essays on the effectiveness of those sequences in the movie, and then hey, the movie keeps going. It just keeps going and going and going. It's like the freaking Energizer Bunny of 1939. And it really does kind of find its way, as the war comes to a close. Eventually in the story, we have, the burning of Atlanta happens shortly after that, which kind of reunites Scarlett and Rhett. And we are back into the relational drama that is sort of, I would love for it to be categorized as the subplot, but it's sort of the other way around. And
right.
This is a good moment for me to sort of, I'm going to detach for a second because I've said a lot of really glowing things about how it knocked this theme out of the park. I have a really hard time with stories that I can't find a character that the movie is telling me to spend time with and perhaps care about, that I just don't like. You know what I mean? And these are some flawed characters up and down the list, other than, save a couple who are pretty noble and true. But Rhett and Scarlett specifically, we've already talked about how absurdly selfish Scarlett is and remains for much of the film. If not all of it. And Rhett is really his own version of the same thing. He has this speech before they do kiss out on the, before she gets back to her home. And it's gross. I mean, it is a moment of him trying to seize what he wants. And then he has a moment, right? And I'll let you interpret this if you want it differently, but he has a moment where he does feel some guilt, like I need to go and, kind of fight back for the cause or whatever that's worth. But his last thing to her is like, can you just give me a kiss before I go? A kiss to remember you by, or something like that. And he forces himself upon her, essentially, right? So we see, again, more perpetuation of certainly the decade in which this was released and the decade that the story is talking about, where we see a dehumanizing of black folks and anyone who is a slave. You could argue not enough in this movie, but certainly we do see it, like you mentioned, in that scene with the little girl with the fan, and just the way that they're spoken to and referred to, right? Like that is verbal abuse enough to tell you something, even if it's not the kind of movie centered around lynching or whipping or those most horrific sort of horrors of the time of slavery in America. But yeah, I think it never goes away for me. It really never goes away. Rhett and Scarlett are toxic, and they're toxic individually, and they're toxic to each other. And yes, they're complicated. And yes, Clark Gable pulls the strings on what the script is giving him. But in the end, I didn't really ever find anyone that I really I liked who survived anyway. What do you think?
Right. Yeah. I mean, the only person that is really likable in this, that survived, would be Mammy, I think.
Yeah.
And with regards to that scene where Rhett is leaving Scarlett and forcing himself on her, I would completely agree with. If we can do a modern reprisal of that, or reappraisal rather, I see his wanting to go fight for the cause, or whatever we're going to call that, where he feels guilty and he calls himself a coward. I see that as his character trying to work beyond his own selfishness, but having no clue what to do. Right? It's not the right choice to go fight for the South when it's on its last legs.
No.
I mean, unless you're Rhett Butler and you're so selfish and all of a sudden you kind of have an epiphany, like, I wait a minute, maybe life is about living outside of yourself and living for something that's not just internal, right? But unfortunately, it's not, let me go fight for the good guys or go help in some actual noble way.
Yeah.
Let me go to the hospital and help the dead and the dying. No, I'm going to go, pick up a gun. And so again, I think he's either confused or he is, he's just wrong.
Yeah.
Right. And so I don't find him having his character. I think vacillates a little more than Scarlett's in terms of trying to do the right thing, whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
But he never gets there either.
Yeah.
And so I would agree that the people that you like the most, I think Melanie of the white cast anyway,
right,
is probably the most noble and And I mean, she's willing to of other social conventions of that time. She's labeled as such a good-hearted and kind person. It's not beneath her to talk to the harlot or whatever that Rhett is so often in the company of. While that scandalizes other people, including Scarlett, it's not beneath her. And I think Dame Olivia de Havilland pulls off that character extraordinarily well. As you mentioned, no one in here is really acting poorly, and she's just another example of that. But unfortunately, besides her, really, there's no one else where you go, oh gosh, what a wonderful character. Because even people like Ashley, he's so tragic, it's kind of pathetic. Yeah. And it becomes not really, and it's just like, so there's a really interesting scene, I think, Travis, when Scarlett and Ashley are talking about running her lumber mill. Yeah. And there is another Irishman that comes in with a work crew of convicts. Mm-hmm. And he's saying, hey, this is the rate I'll charge, but you got to let me do my thing. In other words, I'm going to abuse these guys as much as I need to get what I want out of them. And for Scarlett's worldview, she's like, yep, that's just fine. Yeah. And Ashley says, I really wish you wouldn't hire these people which are essentially in slavery. Yeah. And she says, which I thought with her response, oh boy, here we go, we're getting to some real meat here. She says, you essentially, I'm paraphrasing, you hypocrite. Do you not remember that you were on a plantation with a bunch of slaves? Yeah. And I thought, again, yes, here we go. But then he says, oh, Scarlett, I never was into that. As soon as Father was gone, I was going to set them all free. Oh, my gosh. And I thought, what a pathetic cop-out. Yeah. Because as the audience, I think it's pretty clear you're supposed to go like, oh, yeah, yep, slavery. I guess slavery was wrong. Let's not think about it too hard. And yeah, Ashley, oh, yeah, he didn't really want the slaves. So instead of actually examining the implications of slavery for these individual characters in a way that could be very meaningful and transcendent beyond 1939, the movie takes the easy way out. And I think it's to its detriment, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree. And of all the flawed characters, I call most of them flawed. Even Olivia de Havilland's character Melanie, right? Like she's all about upholding the plantation culture. So that is the context we're talking about, right? That is like the default of the people that are the story that's being told, right? This group of characters are pretty much all okay with that. So that's her big fault. But other than that, like if you go beyond like post-Civil War, right, Melanie, she is shown to have some characteristics that are unusual, right? The fact that she does talk to Miss Whatley is really striking, like you said. The dad is kind of the same way, right? Like the dad character at the beginning, he says land is the only thing worth working for, fighting for, dying for. It's the only thing that lasts, right? And that kind of comes back to Scarlett later in the film. But really what he means by land in this case is, he worked hard for his land, but at the same time, he had slaves to take care of his land. He used the system in place to get what he wanted. And all that being said, I really do like his performance. He has so much to do. Like I didn't really expect him to come back in as big of a way as he did. But as Gerald O'Hara, Thomas Mitchell, he really brings it post his wife's death, in my opinion. He has like a delusional kind of a PTSD scene, right, where like his wife has just died and he is just like fondling her earrings, and he's talking about, well, let's get Mother. She'll know what to do. Let's talk to Mother. And he never gets out of that mode, until the moment that he dies, kind of predictably and somewhat abruptly. But I would like to shout out his performance. I think it's really good. And the score, okay, before we get any further, the score is fantastic. Like this is beautiful. Like in the way that John Williams, again, let's Star Wars name drop a little bit, in the way that John Williams would completely master in something like, Star Wars or any Spielberg film that John Williams has scored, E.T., Jaws, the music really becomes its own supporting character because there are themes for people. The music takes over when the cinematography wants it to. It's really, really solid.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, the most powerful moment for me, at least with the music, is right before intermission.
Yeah.
Where Scarlett says, "I'm never going to be hungry again," and she's come back, and everything has been ransacked by the Union Army, and everything is gone. And I mean, that's just the way it is. I don't even in our modern times, it's like, well, that's what happens in war to the loser. So
Right.
I don't necessarily feel bad for her, especially for her character, but there is just a real moment of humanness where you think she's going to change, and she says, "I will never be hungry again," and there's this pan out and the music swells to its main theme.
Yeah.
And that's one of the shots that I guess there's a few, but that shot continues to stick with me in no small part due to the music. I think.
I agree. And that's the moment where 1 hour and 46 minutes in, to me, as we're getting into the back end of this film now, that for me is the end of the film that I want to watch.
Yes.
Honestly, like,
Yes.
the back half of this film is well made as well. It's telling a similar story. And, like I think you mentioned to me off mic, it's just remarkable that this movie is almost 4 hours long, and it's a whole novel, right? Like, they tell the whole story, and
Right.
nothing feels like it should have been cut. It's just, for me, right, not necessarily a novel or a film that I need to watch people make horrible decisions over and over and over. Like, watch that destruction and peril over and over and over. But yeah, I thought, like, right at an hour 46, like, bam, that's a last moment right there. And then I'm looking, and it's
Right.
like, 2 hours left. And I'm like, wowzers. So let's talk about the back half of the film. We get Scarlett taking the lead, becoming the man of the house in a lot of ways, right? And the opening shot of the second half is the white women picking cotton, right, out in the fields alongside the slaves that are left, the three that have not run away, as they put, but we would say emancipated, freed, thank goodness. And there's a line in there, I guess things like hands and ladies don't matter anymore, as they pick the cotton, right? And that's a great, there's a big turning point in this movie where you just mentioned, which is now they have to deal with the fact that their idealized, picturesque culture is shattered, gone, never coming back. And that's the part of the conversation that's missing if you just read the opening crawl and then you stop there with anger. It is a thing to be angry about, that people would and maybe still do think about this like that. But the rest of the movie really undoes that over and over and over again in a lot of ways. You can talk about how this movie isn't what you might want it to be in regards to the depiction of black slaves and the physical abuse and the amount of it and the degree of it and all of that. But I think in the end, right, what I walk away with is like, this is certainly worth watching because it's super important and it does a lot of things really well. But at the same time, the last hour of the movie kind of, things unravel, right? Like, things unravel for Scarlett and Rhett in a lot of ways. They finally find their way together for good. And he convinces her to marry after she's lost another husband. There's a lot of good stuff in this back half, but I will say, like, the things that I'm going to remember are, like, everybody dies. Like, so many people die in the back half of this movie. What did you think about, like, the last hour or so?
It's a bloodbath, but without any blood. Everyone just, like you said.
Well, there's a little bit of blood.
Well, there is a little bit of blood. It's true. I guess that's maybe not in the last hour strictly, but there's a really interesting scene where a Union, we don't know if he's a deserter really, although the film kind of hints at that, but this Union soldier comes and he's essentially coming to ransack and, maybe take advantage physically of Scarlett. It's not really, it doesn't get to that point. Because as he's this intruder kind of marauding in her house, she takes a revolver that Rhett had given her earlier in the film and puts a ball of .44 caliber lead in his face.
Yeah.
And the film doesn't dwell on that shot, but I do think it's noteworthy that his bloody face is in living color for a split second. And from an era where violence is frequently off screen, where it's like the bad guy pulls the gun or whatever, and then the camera pans away, and then you hear the gunshot. this is in stark contrast to that thing, and I think to very good effect. Again, showing that, here we go hitting the war themes again, but that, the atrocities and tragedies of war don't necessarily stop when the peace treaty is signed.
Yeah.
And, that kind of trauma continues. But yes, there is more death. Melanie ends up dying eventually. The Rhett and Scarlett have a child who dies tragically.
Gosh, that was the one that really did, like, not in a way that, like, I have daughters, and of course that's affecting as a plot point, but I was like, stop killing people. I am exhausted. Right. Like, and perhaps that's the point, right? Perhaps the point is at the end you're like,
yes,
the life is sucked out of you and you're drained, and the destruction is undeniably piled up in front of you. But as a viewer, I was like, please stop. Like, stop it.
Well, and I think it's interesting from our modern lens, that seems to be an indicator to me, the way I'm interpreting that now, is that these people, because they never looked themselves in the mirror, or they never had an honest discussion with each other and went, no duh, why, of course this was bound to happen to us.
Yeah.
We've been living wicked, self-centered lives. We thrived off of the misfortune of other people. Of course we're going to be struck by tragedy. And so, and that seems to be what it is until the film's closing, really tragic last scene, I think, where thankfully no one else dies, at least not physically. And so but again, like you said, Travis, it keeps happening over and over, and it does become emotionally exhausting watching this movie.
Yeah. Like we've hinted at, right? Like, these are pretty much all deeply faulted characters, and they are also deeply complicated characters. So we have no, let's say this, we have no satisfying arcs in this movie to be had, except maybe Melanie, right? I mean, she arguably gets better as the film goes along. But I mean, like Rhett and Scarlett in their own way, like I think you said, vacillate. And there are some really compelling, well-acted, brutally emotional moments. And something I wrote down that I realized in that sequence, not after the daughter dies, where you see Clark Gable at the end of his rope, and it's just so well acted because he is the strong, tough man. And as an actor, I'm looking at him like, you made yourself nothing in this scene. You're a puddle of complete tears and mush, and all the strength is gone. Like, no mortal man can stand strong in that moment, nor should they, right? Like, that is a thing to be mourned in a special, deep way. But beyond that scene, right, we see, again, things just become calcified and numbed as death continues to befall these people. And Rhett has this scene with Scarlett where he's drunk and she comes downstairs and he, verbally, attacks her in a lot of ways. But here's the thing, right? Rhett is a pretty terrible, misogynistic, selfish character who consistently tells the truth, like almost all the way throughout the movie. Like, he is a bad guy, really. Like, and admittedly, I'm out for Rhett Butler, but he tells the truth. So he tells Scarlett to her face, exactly what she is, and he says, he puts his hands on the sides of her head, and he could be trying to physically, like, intimidate her, but more than that, he's trying to, like, impress upon her, like, if I could just squeeze the Ashley, this desire for love that you should never have and will never have out of you, I would, kind of a thing. And then obviously, like, this scene goes places that, this movie has all the darkness in it, to me. You know what I mean? Like, all of it, right? Like, this is an implied rape scene, essentially, right? Like, I mean, there's just this horrible moment, right, where they have this conversation, and he does threaten to, like, physically hurt her, although I don't really think we're supposed to believe that he will, because he does love her in a very complicated, ugly way. And then he just, like, grabs her and takes her upstairs. And, right, the ensuing plot points are, like, he leaves with the daughter and she's pregnant when he comes back. So what are we supposed to do with that information? So yeah, it's an ugly story in a lot of ways.
No, absolutely. And that's what makes that ending for them that much more tragic. I mean, because, when he comes back home and confronts that he has, she says, I'm pregnant, and he says, who's the father? Well, it's yours, of course. And it just makes sense in the context of the movie that is true. And so, unfortunately, there's an act. They have an argument, as they always do throughout this movie, and she loses the child to a miscarriage because she falls down the stairs, or he pushes her.
He moves out of the way just enough, and he says, right, the line is the most important thing.
Go ahead.
Yeah, he says, I hope you do have an accident. And then right after, she falls, and that's when... Yeah. And actually, that's the moment, actually, in the wake of that, that's what breaks him, if I'm not mistaken. He's off screen mourning for the daughter in a very, very, deep way. But that's the moment that I was referring to before, when, we see him, like, at the end of his humanity, essentially. But yeah, let's wrap up. I'm getting PTSD talking about all of the trauma I experienced watching the trauma. The story ends, and it ends in an Oscar clip, kind of Oscar reel fashion, right? There's two lines here that really like resonate in a lot of ways, and they stick in our culture as a cultural touchstone. You want to talk about that last scene with them?
Yeah, so he's had it with her because Melanie has died, and as they're over there, he's still at that point while Melanie's dying. I think the film is leading us to believe Rhett is still committed to Scarlett. He still loves her, and he wants her to love him.
Yeah,
but Scarlett comes out of that room where Melanie is dying, has died, and she just falls into Ashley's arms and just, wants to mourn with him. And that is the point where Rhett is just done,
Yeah.
And so in the ensuing conversation that Ashley and Scarlett has, she realizes, oh my gosh, I can never have Ashley. And I think she really, for the first time, she actually does a little bit come to her senses and realize it's just in my head. I've invented something that's not real. It's never going to happen. It's unhealthy. I got to go to Rhett. That is the person that loves me. That's the only thing that makes sense.
Right.
And so she, like a true tragedy, she chases after him, and he says, no, I'm done. And it's not, I don't think there, I think you could make a compelling argument for the opposite point that I'm trying to make. But my take from that is she says to him things that she has never said in earnest before in the movie. She says, I'm sorry to him, and she freaking means it, I think, this time. Vivian Leigh is selling that line in a much different way than when she tries to fake it with other men, including Rhett, throughout the movie.
That's right.
And she is begging him to come, to stay. I love you. I just want to be with you. And what is going to become of me if you leave? And then he gives the famous line, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. And it is, I think, not just because of that word, which was controversial to have in a movie at that time, in that era of the code, but that's the appropriate, we talk about language sometimes in movies, Travis, and, that to me that's the exact, there's no better, in our little intro, we talked about one of the other alternatives, one of many that they came up to try to appease the code authority. And there's nothing that words have meaning. Yeah. And damn means something very damn different, frankly, than whoop or heck or what. It has its own meaning. And Clark Gable, he sells that line. And to me, that is such a definitive answer to where that character stands. He says, "I am done. It's over." I think that's why that strong of language is used, to indicate the kind of finality with which he intends to walk out of her life forever, no matter what she says.
Yeah.
He has closed the door on her, and unfortunately her last lines involve her concocting in her mind a plan to win him back somehow. But it rings of more tragedy because it seems in vain. And another fantasy, like she had this brief moment of clarity, and unfortunately she goes back, she retards back to that lower level of thinking.
Yeah. After all, tomorrow is another day, and you're like, no,
Ugh.
It's not. It's really, really not.
It's not.
It is. It's if you ever should have known, like, it's too late. It's now. It's right now. So on that beautiful but tragic and painful and exhausting and long note, Let's go home, Justin, shall we?
Let's bring it on home.
All right. Well, as if we didn't, thread this needle beautifully like two verbally, gymnastic geniuses throughout the episode. This section is entitled.
That's us.
Yeah. I've been known as a genius and a gymnast and a verbalist, all at different times and in different places. Is it worth your time? That's what we're calling this section. This is our final concise review and rating of a film from the 30s. And man, this was, I'm glad we left this till the end in a lot of ways, because
Yes.
for me, this movie requires a ton of work from you as a viewer. And
Yep.
with every genre we've touched, with every different director and kind of space and scope of movie that we've touched, this by far is the most endurance tested you'll be as a viewer of all the 10 films we've done, and of like a lot of films that you could ever watch. And so in a lot of ways, I do think that the current conversation resulted in a better environment to watch this movie. I think people talking about it is better than people taking it as we assume it should be taken. The preface that I saw really served this thing up well for me. And this is my final take on the movie is, the first thing is I just don't like the people in it, and therefore it's going to be hard for me to tell you should rewatch this once a year. It's just that kind of movie, right? Where it might be a great film, but it might not be an infinitely rewatchable one for a lot of reasons. First and foremost for me being like, I just dislike these people, and I hate watching them be terrible to others and cause destruction and all that. On another note, which is, maybe the buzzier part of the conversation, I don't think that the recent controversy and kind of the reappraisal, let's call it, of this film and whether it should be accepted and streamable and all of that, I don't think it resulted in the wrong decision. I think people should watch this movie, and people should watch this movie and do the work, because really, like, there are so many good films out there that tell the story that people are yearning for this story to tell, right? The story of abused, mutilated, and just physically and emotionally repressed Black slave characters at the center of the story, right? Like, those films, those books, those stories, we need to keep telling them. We need to find more of them that need to be told, and tell them over and tell them louder and in greater detail, all of that, right? But this isn't that story, right? Like, that's not the purpose of this story. And that may be a fault, right? Like, that it goes through such great lengths to catch such a scope, and yet it really does in a lot of ways miss that part. But my advice to anybody would be, watch this movie, and if you can, watch the preface, do a little bit of research, get the context needed to understand this film in a better way, and then go watch 12 Years a Slave. Maybe not back to back, because you might want to jump off a bridge or something, but like, there's a breadth of stories that exist, and this is not an argument that enough of them exist and they don't need to make them anymore. Absolutely, these stories need to keep being told, and in greater numbers for representation's sake and truthfulness' sake and all that. But how often would I rewatch this? I will probably not watch this movie from beginning to end ever again, because it was painful and exhausting, and the characters annoy me in a fundamental way. But there are sequences I might rewatch again because they deeply affected me. I think the things it says about war are infinitely valuable and need to be said over and over and over again. And you know what, Justin? I think we've had a conversation about this before, but what came to mind was, what's the Mel Gibson movie that I trash on because of this reason? It's
The
that
Patriot?
No.
Or We Were Soldiers?
No, beyond that, he directed it, but he's not in it. It's got the one where the guy climbs the cliff and brings people back, and it's more recent. Hacksaw Ridge. Okay, Hacksaw Ridge is a film.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Here's the deal. Okay.
Yeah.
Where Gone with the Wind may be faulted, may present a perhaps a diluted or picturesque version of the Antebellum South at times, most notably in the opening crawl and specific characters. What it does incredibly well, and I think the most important thing is it shows you what war is and the toll that it takes on a society and an individual and a human soul, in so many ways successfully. And a film like Hacksaw Ridge, by contrast, is so incredibly terrible at that. And I'll tell you why. The movie's about a pacifist, a guy who said, I'm getting drafted, going to go to war, but it's against my religion, against my moral code to do violence. So the whole film is about him not doing violence. He goes and he brings people down and he saves the wounded and he saves a ton of lives and he does this incredibly heroic feat. And you know what Mel Gibson does as the director of this film? He shows you every piece of gore and flying intestinal blood splatter. And again, like Justin, like you said, it's not that that's not necessarily a reality, but what is the point of the story, right? What is it saying? Well, that's a story that purports to tell you that, a man with an air and a moral code that guides him to be a maker of peace and not a maker of war, somehow with endurance and incredible strength and fortitude made it through war without firing a bullet and did an amazing thing. But the movie just it divulges itself. It wallows and it just rolls around in the fact that it can get away with the blood and gore. Gone with the Wind is the opposite of that, right? Like, it's almost a bloodless film in a lot of ways, but you walk away from it thinking, let's never, ever, ever do that again. So that's my ultimate takeaway. Justin, what do you have to say?
Yeah, it's tremendous, I think, for a movie that has such a scale and a scope that can pull back the camera and look at the world, supposedly, that if we're truly evaluating this, that it does so, but has a big blind spot. And that blind spot is for every African-American character in this movie. Yes, Mammy deserves the Oscar that she earned. Absolutely. But there is, I think this movie's big fault, like you alluded to, is for being so big and being such a grand story that I feel like we could have stood for about an hour less of white people dying and an hour more of what do our black characters actually think when the white people aren't around?
Yeah.
What are their experiences more? Because you get some really interesting, I think, and sometimes subversive in a good way, commentary for them. So there's the guy, is it Big Sam? Is that the sort of foreman of the slaves that Scarlett meets in the street when
I think he's
when the war is going on?
As
Big Sam or Big Jim? I get them mixed
Big
up.
Big Sam, yeah. There's Pork.
One of them's a made-up character.
Pork is the one who gets
Big
the
Sam,
watch,
okay.
and Big Sam is the one who's like the field foreman.
Right. So when she meets him, she's saying, "What is going on?" And he says, "We are going to go dig a ditch for the white folks to hide in."
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my gosh, there is not a more subversive good, because he says it with the sort of like, quote unquote, happy slave appearance. But I don't know how you can hear those words and think, he's just a simple-minded guy. He's absolutely getting his digs in. Now, of course, the argument is absolutely valid. Does that obviate, the crimes against African Americans that this movie seems to just wash over? Absolutely not. But I think it is interesting that line is even included instead of just having him say like, well, we're going to go dig a trench to help the war effort or something. Yeah. No, he takes an opportunity collectively, the movie takes an opportunity for him to make fun of the people that enslave him. And so, unfortunately, though, the movie whiffs a lot of other opportunities to really represent African Americans well. I think the shining example of this is when Prissy is with Scarlett and Melanie's going to have her baby, and Prissy originally tells the doctor, "Don't worry, I've delivered babies lots of times." And I thought, wow, again, if the line had just stood there and that had been true for the whole movie, I thought that's great. Scarlett is shown to be useless despite her, her upbringing and her privilege and all that, while Prissy's actually experienced with the things of this world that are actually useful.
Yeah.
I thought this is fantastic. Unfortunately, for no good reason except that Scarlett is forced into a situation where she has to help, Prissy is later proved to be a liar, which is just not, in a movie that already has so little representation of African Americans, just felt like a real crime.
Yeah.
And so like you alluded to with mentioning how many slaves either, were emancipated and ran away, thank goodness, from Tara, or were, forcibly conscripted to service for the Confederacy somehow. I didn't find it totally unbelievable that those three characters, Pork, Prissy, and Mammy, would stay behind, because everyone's different. And, unfortunately, what did happen in the South, right? Not unfortunately, every African American person did not leave for greener pastures, right. And unfortunately, we're just in a new form of slavery, essentially, for a lot longer after the Civil War was over. So I didn't find that necessarily unbelievable that those characters would stay behind, but I think because the movie doesn't do service to them and doesn't bother to say, this is what those people probably actually felt. I know that Victor Fleming was encouraged by, I think, the NAACP when this movie was in production. Please, they pleaded with him, hire an advisor that is African American.
Right.
Hire somebody to advise you on this movie who has a real black perspective, because you're hiring these people that are experts in Southern culture and wardrobes. But what good is that if you miss out of the people that were, the most viciously mistreated? And unfortunately, the movie never did, and I think that shows. And that is of course, that's what's being talked about now and is the glaring issue. So like you said, I would agree. This movie does say some things that are good, especially about war. And bigger picture, whether it intends to or not, it says this society that breeds these kinds of people had to come down because it just breeded self-centered, blind, abusive, horrible people, essentially, that could care less if they hurt, murdered, or otherwise abused other human beings. But unfortunately, that message is really diluted by the inability for the film to really confront those things. And yeah, of course, it's not 12 Years a Slave. This movie is not Roots, and it doesn't purport to be that. But I think it's a shame that it takes, again, such a wide picture at supposedly this era and does so without examining really the main driver for why the war had to happen in the first place.
Right.
So for that reason, I'm glad to have watched it, and I would agree with you. It just so that you can be better informed. Buckle up if you're sick and got the flu or something,
yeah, and
got to stay in bed all day. Hey, if you got 4 hours, you might as well put it on, and just so you can be a part of the conversation at least. There's still a lot of cinematically, just as a production and as a picture, there's a lot to be commended. But there are absolutely plenty of issues, both with regards to race and humanity and just tragedy that need to be discussed, and I think taken on their own merits too. So I think I'm with you, Travis, which is probably a little boring that we're not maybe more contradictory with one another, but I don't think I'll ever really sit down and watch this whole movie again unless it's, with somebody. Oh, please, I haven't seen this before. Will you watch this with me? And I'll just make sure that we have at least 30 years left in our lives so that we have enough time to finish it. So that's sort of where I stand with this. It's the mammoth of a movie, right? And I think it has earned that place. But like we said in the beginning, I think that the trouble is that it's not given enough prefaces. And I think that is really kind of reflecting on it more. I think it is wonderful that HBO Max is doing that, and I think, frankly, you don't have to come at this movie. We don't have to just do a 180, I don't think, and say, you know what? No, this movie is a piece of garbage because it doesn't accurately portray or give enough screen time to African Americans who played such an important role in the kind of story if this was, at all a semblance of reality. While that's true and absolutely valid, I don't think that just eliminates the more worthy parts of the movie. I think it makes it very problematic and adds to it being painful to watch.
Yeah.
But I think having a preface, having this be more of a communal setting, whether that's in a college classroom or if you're old, art theater showing classic movies or something, This is still a wonderful movie to watch, and exactly for the purpose of having those conversations, and hopefully those conversations move us forward, and make us confront those kinds of things, whether it's white privilege or representation in movies or the actual Civil War, and unresolved elements of that we still see in our culture. This movie's got a lot to say, and I think it's only gonna, as we've shown over how many days have we been here now talking about this movie, Travis? I mean, there's no end seemingly to what you can discuss with this movie. So I encourage everyone to at least go check it out and think for yourself and see what you think the movie's saying.
Yes, a college film class, an old movie theater, or even a podcast.
I see what you did there.
That was a whopper, but I think all really good stuff to talk through with you, man, and a heck of a way to end the series. I've so much enjoyed this. I hope you listeners have as well. Justin, do you have any kind of parting words for our listeners on the 10th episode?
Thanks for however long you've been on this journey with us. Thanks, and we hope that you'll stick around and see what else we're going to talk about next.
Yes, stick around for some heists. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Let the movie speak.
Hey, since you're still here and still listening, thank you, by the way, we'd like to ask an additional favor of you.
We have social media. It's a thing on the internet, and all you need to do is find us on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook and like and subscribe. I know this is annoying, but we have to ask you because we want more people to hear the show. In addition to that, if you could rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, we would greatly appreciate it. See you next week. Bye.